Hello and welcome to the 8th Sunday in Ordinary Time, aka the last Sunday before we have to give up stuff for Lent, which is a bummer. I usually give up all desserts, all sweets, all cake, candy, cookies, etc. And it's tough, but we're doing it for Jesus, so yeah, that makes it okay. So today's gospel reading was from Luke. We're still in chapter 6, and we're keep going on. Today it was verses 39 through 45. So Jesus is talking to his disciples about judgment, and he starts making this really weird analogy about trees. So he's sitting with his disciples, and he starts saying, "Can the blind lead the blind? They're both going to fall into a pit. The student is not above the teacher, but everybody who is fully trained will be just like that teacher." So, when you see a speck of sawdust in your brother's eye, but how can you say that when you pay no attention to a huge plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother or your buddy, "Let me take that speck out of your eye," when you're failing to see the huge stick of wood that's in your own eye? It's very hypocritical. It's like the pot calling the kettle black here, right? So first you have to remove the plank from your own eye before you can point out the speck in your brother's eye. And then you'll be able to see clearly what's going on with the other person. So he's making this analogy, right, about saying you can't judge others if you yourself, has the same issue, even on a bigger scale, which is a great analogy we have here, the size, right? He's saying your buddy has a speck in their eye, but you have a gigantic plank of wood in your eye. So he's going on to say, a tree that bears, a good tree will not produce bad fruit, and a bad tree won't produce good fruit. And each tree is recognized by its fruit, right? Like an apple tree produces apples, we know, lemon tree will produce lemons, right? That's how we identify a tree. Oh, it's growing lemons, it must be a lemon tree. If it's growing pears, it's probably not a lemon tree. There's a good bet that it's a pear tree. So he goes on to say similarly, people don't pick figs from thorn bushes. People don't pick grapes from briars. A good man brings good things out of good stored up in his heart, and an evil man will probably, keep dwelling on evil things that are stored up in his heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. So here he's talking about judgment, right? And this is perfect. This passage came perfect timing for Lent, too, because for Lent, we're not just giving up something, right, to make ourselves better or to make ourselves miserable. Remember, Jesus spent 40 days and 40 nights in the desert being tempted by the devil. The least I can do is give up cake for 40 days. So he's saying you can't judge other people. So during this Lenten season, instead of just trying to give up something, let's try to make ourselves better. Let's try to take that wood out of our own eye so that we can better help other people. Because it's really easy to judge people, right? And that's what Jesus is saying. He's saying if you can point out a speck is pretty indistinguishable, right? If you can point out a speck on another person, you're probably looking for that speck. It's really easy to find any sort of small fault with anybody else, and it's completely easy to ignore something like a big old plank sticking out of your own eye. So before you can help another person, you have to be able to help yourself. I personally think Whitney Houston said it best, learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all, so you have to love yourself before you can let anybody else in. Similarly, you have to be able to first judge yourself and take a good hard look at yourself. It's really hard to find fault with yourself, and I completely understand that, and Jesus completely understands this too. Going back to last week's when Jesus kind of went through that teenage high school girl phase, that's why he was put as a man on earth, so he could relate to us. So we don't just see him as this all high and mighty mystical being. No, he was a physical man who grew up in a household with a mom and a dad. He went to school. Granted, he was busy turning water into wine at weddings, so he didn't exactly have a normal adulthood, but he was put on earth and he went through similar experiences to us, so that way he can speak to them. So it's not just him making up hypothetical situations. He's gone through some of this stuff. So he knows how easy it is to judge others based on almost nothing. And that's why it's such a great comparison between the speck of dust and the gigantic board. It's also easy to see similar faults in other people that you have in yourself, right? Because you kind of know what to look for, and you almost want to make fun of them because it makes you feel a little bit better. I'm not going to work on myself when I can help fix you, because everybody is perfect, right? We're all perfect. Nobody has any faults. Well, obviously, that's not true. And that's what Jesus is kind of saying here. Before you can help anybody else, you have to be able to help yourself. That way you can see their problem a little more clearly, right? It's very hypocritical if my friend and I, we both don't study for a test and he fails and I fail. I can't just pick on him and say, hey man, you deserve to fail because you didn't study, when that'd be very hypocritical of me because I'm in the same exact situation. Maybe my grade was even worse. So I have no place to be saying anything to my friend. So same thing here. First I have to work on myself, say, okay, how can I fix this? How can I go back and do this before I can go and judge him, before I can help him? Miley Cyrus even said it, only God can judge us, right? So only God can judge us. I have no business judging my friend. He made his own decision to also not study for this test, therefore he paid the consequence of failing. And so did I. But I can't really speak to anything about him because I made the same exact mistake. It would be very hypocritical of me to say anything about it. So in order to see the situation more clear, first I have to get over myself. And there's also kind of a good rule of thumb. I've seen it as a post on Facebook a couple times. If you see something wrong with somebody and they can't fix it in the next 5 minutes, don't point it out. Whether that's their weight, they have acne problems, the way they're walking, don't point that kind of stuff out. But if they have a piece of lettuce in their tooth and it's something they can fix like this, sure, let them know. So it's being able to distinguish between that speck and that plank, right? You don't want to go around making other people feel bad. That's not our job as Catholics. That's not our job even as people. As Catholics, we want to go and spread the good word. But how can we spread the good word if we don't know enough about it and we're so busy judging everybody else about it? Right? Jesus didn't go around judging people. Maybe he did in his head a little bit. I don't know. But people, like sick people, the lepers even. The leper came up to Jesus and Jesus healed him. Jesus wasn't like, ew, get away from me, your skin's falling off, gross, nasty. Nope, he was like, alrighty, I'm going to heal you because you believed in me. So that's what Jesus wants us to do. He doesn't want us to judge other people, because he can only ultimately judge us too. And then he goes on to say this really weird tree analogy, but that kind of goes along with the judging, right? So if you grow up evil and being evil is all you know, you're probably going to be an evil person. If you look at any of your cartoon villains who grew up in a really miserable situation, they don't grow up to be good people. They grow up to be kind of like hardened and bitter and just kind of angry, and they don't know why. But someone who grows up in a good and nurturing and loving environment, they're going to bear good fruit. That's the tree you want to pick the apples from, right? That's the tree you want to go up to and pick the lemons off of. Grapes don't grow on trees, they grow on a vine. Shouting that out. So do pineapples. Pineapples grow on bushes, which was an interesting learning experience for me. Just couldn't picture a pineapple growing on anything else. So it's kind of that nature versus nurture, right? But because the tree is bad, doesn't mean it can't be saved to be a good tree, right? And just because a tree is bearing really good fruit, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to always bear good fruit. It might have a rotten apple time and again. So even though it's kind of an interesting analogy, it's very applicable to life. Because generally, if you have a good tree and you have a bad tree, you're probably not going to pay much attention to the bad tree, and it's only going to get worse. You're just going to keep praising up that good tree, which is fine. But that good tree, maybe that could help bad tree out. You can take some extra fertilizer that you've been giving the attention to the good tree and give that to the bad tree to try to help it become a good tree. Because Jesus is saying, your mouth speaks what your heart is full of. So if your heart is full of rotten things, and like the tree is just producing rotten apples, your heart is full of rotten things, you're going to say rotten things. You're going to be more likely to judge other people. You're going to ignore that gigantic plank of wood sticking out of your eye, and you're going to point out that speck of dust in everybody else's eye around you. But if you're a good tree, and you're producing good fruit, and you're very, you're just a great tree, and your heart is full of goodness, and that allows you to grow and become that good tree, you're going to produce good fruit that everybody's going to want to take a bite out of, right? No one's going to want to go take a bite from the bad tree. They're going to want to take a bite from the good tree. But in order to get into the position of the good tree, where people want to come up to you and pick your fruit, you have to first remove that gigantic plank out of your own eye. So these two things, he's talking about a piece of dust versus a plank of wood and two different trees. So it seems like they're not connected whatsoever. And as a disciple, I'd be there imagining the disciples going, all right, Jesus, what are you talking about here? But Jesus, he knows what he's doing. He's going to bring it all back together, right? So in order to spread the good word, or to set a good example, or to be able to judge people, first you need to take that plank of wood out of your own eye so you know what you're talking about, so that you can see things clearly. So you can say, okay, maybe that speck, that's nothing to worry about. That's fine. So you're going to continue spreading the good. But if you're like the bad tree, you're going to see evil or, bad things or rotten things all around you and probably ignore the good things. You're going to be so blinded by that plank of wood in your own eye that you're going to be pointing out every little thing about everybody else, which is not a nice thing to do, and therefore you're just going to keep producing rotten fruit, and no one's going to want to come to you for help. But if you are able to give constructive criticism because you can see things clearly and you can have a different point of view, people are going to want to come up to you, and you'd be the good tree. People want to pick fruit from the good tree, right? You want a good apple. You don't go to the grocery store and say, give me the worst apple you got. No, you want the nice, clean apples. So that's why this passage is such great timing, coming straight right before Lent like this. Because not only should you be, Lent is a good time to reflect and give things up and go to reconciliation and go get your ashes. Great. But it's also a good time to think about removing that plank from your own eye and being able to see things clearly and see things more from Jesus' point of view. You want to be that good tree, right? That's our goal, to be that good tree that people want to come up to for help and to pick fruit off of, right? We want to be that person to help other people. We want to go to heaven. We want to, we want to plant our roots here so that we can soar all the way up to heaven and be a good tree. We don't want to rot and wither away like the bad tree. So we want to so this Lent, I encourage you to, give up what you're going to give up. Pray a little bit extra. Do your regular Lenten commitment. But also look at yourself a little bit more. But first, before you have a good look at yourself, you're going to want to take that plank out of your own eye.